Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be talking about constructing a counter argument. So, before we begin, if you have not completed your original essay, the delineation essay on Is Survival Selfish, you do need to do that before you'll be able to do this, because what we're doing is we're going to take the same essay. You're not writing anything new for the introduction, body, and summary paragraphs. We're just including a counter argument paragraph in this essay that we've already constructed. So of course, if you don't already have the essay, you won't be able to include a counter argument paragraph. Before we get started on the counter argument itself, I have a few general notes and feedback, some things that I noticed across a couple of essays. This isn't everybody. If your scores were good, then you don't need to worry about this. If you're a little bit concerned, I did leave some notes, but I just wanted to go over it in a little bit easier format. So when we're delineating an essay, remember I said before, we're not doing analysis. When we're delineating an essay, all we are trying to say is what do we think the author is trying to say and how are they making that point? For this essay, for example, we don't want to hear like, oh, this is what I think about is survival selfish. Like, no, I don't think survival is selfish at all. Or I do think survival is selfish, or her essay is good or bad or whatever. That's not what we're doing here. We're just answering the question, what is Wallace herself trying to say, and what is the way that she goes about trying to say it? In addition, this is kind of an ongoing issue. This is one of the hardest things that we work on in freshman year. This is not just from this essay, but it did get highlighted, I think, in this essay, is that for the reasoning, guys, you can't just tell me what the quote means. That could be part of it. If the quote is maybe difficult to understand or its meaning isn't clear, then you can spend some time saying, oh, this is what the quote is trying to say. But you then also have to have the reasoning that explains exactly why that quote supports your thesis. So here's an example. In the first example, that's just explaining what the quote is. And this is from my sample essay. It says, in the first two paragraphs, she uses the story of J. Bruce Ismay to illustrate that society looks down on people who save themselves. Okay, great. That explains what she's saying in the paragraph, but it doesn't actually explain the reasoning, how that supports my thesis. What I need is this second half, this part that's italicized. It says, just by asking a rhetorical question that contradicts what she's implying, that it is smart to save yourself, right? Like I've got that last sentence that says, here's why it proves my thesis. I'm not just giving you the explanation of the quote itself. So the counter argument. A counter argument is an author, you are the author in this case. A counter argument is an author's attempt to do two things, predict how someone will disagree or argue with them, and then also present a reason why that kind of imaginary person is wrong. If you recall back to the beginning of the year, this is where we had our example of you want to go to McDonald's and you know before you even open your mouth that your mom is going to say, we've got food at home. So before you even start to make the argument, you say, we should go to McDonald's because dad already ate all the food at home, right? You're anticipating what your opponent is going to say, or someone who disagrees with you, you're anticipating what they're going to say, and you're providing a reason in advance as to why their disagreement is null and void and why ultimately you are correct. So why would we include a counter argument? Why would we allow an argument that is against our main thesis? Why would we take the time to include that? Well, there's a handful of reasons. The first reason, before I even get started, I should say, it's not absolutely necessary, like every single time. Sometimes you won't want to have a counter argument. Sometimes the argument you're making won't lend itself to having a counter argument. That's fine. For this, you should have one because that's the assignment. But just so you know, don't feel like you absolutely every single time must have a counter argument. If you can, it's good because it helps you examine kind of all sides of the argument. It puts you in the mindset of, well, all right, this is what I think, but if I didn't think that, if someone disagreed with that, why might they disagree with it? And it really kind of helps you examine your argument from all sides to really think about what you're saying and really make sure that your argument is sound, that it makes sense, and that the thesis you're trying to claim is accurate. Okay? So it doesn't matter what kind of essay you're doing, as long as you have a thesis, you can have a counter argument, right? Like as long as you're trying to prove something, somebody else could theoretically be trying to prove something else. So in a delineation essay, what you're trying to prove is this is what Wallace is saying, right? Our thesis was something like Wallace infers or claimed that survival isn't selfish by using rhetorical questions and anecdotes. That's what we're trying to prove. We read the essay, we say this is what we think she's saying, here's how she's doing it. A counterargument might be something like Wallace could be interpreted as saying that survival is selfish, or Wallace doesn't make a claim and this text only explores the question. Anything that disagrees with some part of our thesis, we can use that as our counterargument. So when we create the counterargument, what do? First, it should be its own paragraph. Okay, it's a separate idea, and that's what paragraphs do. Paragraphs define ideas. A paragraph should contain one idea. It should discuss one concept. And so since this is sort of a different concept than your body paragraph, it needs its own paragraph. So for an essay of this length, you're only going to pick one kind of element of your thesis to counter argue. Don't try and tear apart the whole thing. You don't have space. It's not necessary. Later on in your career, you may have longer counter arguments, but for this right now, just kind of pick like one element. So the structure, it's still basically a tiers paragraph. It's not too terribly different. There's only one thing that's separate. TIER is all kind of the same. It's just written from the opposite viewpoint, right? So you have a topic sentence that says like, here's why you might disagree with my thesis. And then you still have an introduction and evidence, and you even have a response. In order to have a good counter argument, you need to have reasoning behind the counter evidence that you're supplying. If that sounds a little bit confusing, you'll see in the example in a second. The only part that's different from a tiers paragraph is you're not really going to have a summary. Instead, what you're going to have is your counter response. After the reasoning as to why the counter, the person who disagrees with you, what their reasoning would be, you're then going to provide your own reasoning as to why that imaginary person is wrong. Again, I recognize that in concept, this is a little bit confusing, so I'm going to show you an example here. So here's our topic sentence. Wallace never makes an explicit claim. It could be argued that this piece is not meant to lead the reader to a particular conclusion and is simply an exploration of the question at hand. So what part of my thesis am I disagreeing with? I'm disagreeing with the idea that she does make, even by inference, that she makes a strong claim that survival isn't selfish. I'm saying no, my counter argument is no, she doesn't really make that claim. She even admits it's kind of a question, so it's not necessarily fair to say that she's saying that, right? So that that's part of the thesis that I think is wrong. So here's my intro. In the third paragraph, Wallace notes that survival is, and I just lead right into my evidence, a complex question because there are so many factors involved and every survival situation is different. Now, I include a second piece of evidence just because I happen to notice that it was there. If you've only got one piece of evidence for your counter argument, that's fine. I'm not saying you have to include two. Like I said, I just happened to notice there was a second one that really worked, so I included it. In her final paragraph, she admits that there can also be a fine line between smart and selfish. Note this ellipsis here, and then I have this and in brackets. What the ellipsis means is, hey, there's part of this quote that I took out because it kind of didn't fit. And by putting that word and in brackets, that lets the reader know that this word and is not something that was included in the original text, and that I, Mr. Journs, the author of this essay, have included that word in order to make the quote more understandable and to make sense. I haven't changed the meaning of the quote really. I just took out this part about her friend who was in the military for 27 years because I didn't think it was relevant. But that's what that means. And that's a fine thing to do Because again, I'm not twisting her words. I'm not trying to make her say something that she didn't say. I'm not changing the meaning of her quote. I'm just making it kind of fit in the context of my essay, and that's okay. So here's my reasoning, right? This is the person, the imaginary person who disagrees with me. They would say, it may not be fair to make such a strong inference from her rhetorical question, given that she admits the question is a tough one. Right? I'm saying, yeah, she maybe leans this way from her rhetorical questions, but even in her text, she's admitting that it's a hard question. There's lots of different factors. So, maybe it's not fair to say that she really falls on one side or another. So that's the TIER, just like normal. Now we're getting into my counter reasoning. This is me back trying to show why this imaginary person, right, who wrote this first couple of sentences is wrong. So here's my counter reasoning. I say, however, these qualifiers are only there because Wallace recognizes that there isn't a single definitive answer, right? I'm explaining why she can have these questions and why Wallace can maybe not be making a super strong statement, right? There isn't a single definitive answer, so she does leave it a little bit ambiguous, but her implications still make her feelings on the subject readily available. So I'm kind of explaining away, I'm using my counter reasoning to kind of explain away the reasoning that I wrote, and then I'm tying it back to my thesis. Her feelings on the subject are readily visible. Okay? So your assignment is you're going to take the essay that you've already written. There's a new form for it. I'm going to ask you to copy and paste just so I can see everybody's essays in context. So you're going to write a new counter-argument paragraph to include in the essay that you have already written. It shouldn't take long. That'll be due Wednesday, and then we will move on with a new thing on Thursday. And then this weekend is a long weekend. I got a 4-day weekend, for as much as that means in our weird circumstances, guys. Okay, that's really it. I feel like I should do a weird YouTube sign off, but I'm not going to. Do your assignments. I'll see you guys later, maybe, at least next year. All right, bye.